Good morning, good evening, good night, wherever you are. Hello and greetings from sunny and beautiful Montreal. My name is Jakhu. I'm a full professor and acting director at the Institute of Air and Space Law at McGill University here in Montreal. Before we start our formal webinar, as you are aware of what is happening in Ukraine, out of respect for the human tragedy which is unfolding in Ukraine, we would like to express our concern and sympathies, and I invite Quinn to say a few words in this regard.
Thank you, Professor. I think it's just appropriate. Everything that we're doing right now seems almost irrelevant and meaningless to the extent of the human suffering that's going on in the Ukraine and in its border countries. We have someone here on our panel, my dear friend Kinga, from Poland, who is the country not only is opening their doors, she's opened her own doors to the refugees, some 500,000 people. So unquestionably, while AI and the aviation industry is an extraordinarily important topic, none is more important than to stand up for freedom and democracy and to pray and give our thoughts to the Ukrainian people and our thanks to all the border countries that are accepting the refugees, and to thank also the International Civil Aviation Organization, Yuri, ICAO, which has also stood up along with the United Nations in condemning this act of aggression. And we're hopeful for a very peaceful cessation of hostilities very soon, and to address the human suffering that is ongoing. So I thank you, Ron, for that opportunity, and Kinga, our prayers directly to you and your family and those who are entering Poland. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ken. Our sympathies and prayers are with the people of Ukraine and also in neighboring countries, particularly in Poland. Coming back to the webinar, on behalf of the Institute of Air and Space Law, it is with great pleasure that I welcome you all to a webinar on machine reading, big data, and artificial intelligence in aviation, harnessing technology and managing risks. This is the fourth episode of Institute series of webinars that examine law in a rapidly evolving aviation industry. First, I would like to make a formal statement that recognizes the unique and enduring relationship that exists between indigenous peoples and their traditional territories in Canada. And I quote, McGill University is located on land which has long served as a site of meeting and exchanges among indigenous peoples, including the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations. McGill honors, recognizes, and respects these nations as the traditional stewards of the lands and waters from which we are organizing this webinar today. This statement befits very well with the purpose of this webinar, which is a meeting of people from around the world. I believe some of the attendees might not be aware of the McGill Institute of Air and Space Law. Let me say a few words about our institute. Since its creation in 1951, the Institute has been the world's leading academic institution in the fields of air law and space law. The Institute offers graduate level education and provides opportunities for research at 4 levels: graduate certificate, Master of Law, Doctor of Civil Law, and postdoctoral research. It produced more than 1,200 graduates from more than 120 countries. In 1996, the Institute received International Civil Aviation Organization prestigious award, which is known as Edward Warner Award, which is the highest distinction in the field of civil aviation. You will find the theme of today's webinar fascinating and valuable. It certainly is for me, as I know almost nothing about artificial intelligence and machine reading. What I picked up, the information or simplest definition from Faguni Desai, he tells us that artificial intelligence is about replacing human decision making with more sophisticated technologies. We'll see how accurate that statement is, and our panelists will guide us or teach us. Nevertheless, in 2014, Stephen Hawking expressed his dire warning. He predicted that the development of full artificial intelligence could spell the end of the human race. It would take off on its own and redesign itself at an ever-increasing rate. Humans, who are limited by slow biological evolution, couldn't compete and would be superseded. I personally believe that almost all technologies have positive and negative implications. In order to harness their benefits for humanity, they must be ethically assessed and legally regulated appropriately. In this context, I find the message by Klaus Schwab, who is the founder of World Economic Forum, quite appealing. He advises that we must address individually and collectively moral and ethical issues raised by cutting-edge research in artificial intelligence and biotechnology. Thus, like you, I will be attending this webinar with great interest and curiosity to learn more about these technologies, particularly about their applications in the aviation field. For this webinar, we have invited highly competent panelists. They will explain how to harness these technologies and manage their risks in the aviation field. They will be introduced by the moderator of the webinar. I have the pleasure to introduce Mr. Yuri Fattah, who will be the moderator. Yuri is a program manager of the Multidisciplinary Priorities in the Air Navigation Bureau of International Civil Aviation Organization. He currently works on the commercial space operations above FL 600, artificial intelligence, and other issues on the leading edge of the aviation sector. Yuri served as coordinator of the 2019 ICAO Innovation Fair, as well as 2020 Global Symposium on the implementation of innovation in aviation. Ladies and gentlemen, in my view, Yuri's knowledge and experience in artificial intelligence and aviation from interdisciplinary perspective makes him the perfect person to moderate this webinar. I wish you all productive webinar and hope you will find this webinar fruitful and enjoyable. Thank you very much for your attention. Over to Yuri.
Thank you very much, Professor, for the kind introduction. Distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, a few housekeeping notes, if I may. The format of this webinar will be for me to give a very short stage-setting presentation. This will be followed by introducing our panelists, who will be invited to make some opening remarks. We will then go into the discussions, which I hope will be driven by the questions from the floor. In order to submit a question, please send them via chat to us. Please use the chat function in Zoom to send us your questions. Please note that this session is recorded and will be made available on the webpage of the Institute. So without further ado, please allow me to get us into the subject by providing a short stage setting presentation. In the 1990s, a combination of advances in technologies and exponential growth in the number of people with access to knowledge and the resources needed to develop solutions led to a surge in innovations. In the middle of the last decade, that wave hit the shores of aviation and added to the impressive growth of the sector. This graphic displays some of the innovations in aviation. Most of the nodes in this visual were not around 5 years ago, and almost all of them were not here in the year 2000. These innovations represent a range of maturity, but have been proven to one degree or another. They may have working prototypes, or some of them are even in operation already, and many of them have serious investments of capital behind them. They're not just new technologies, or creative use of older technologies. They include new processes, new ways to address old problems. Much of it is enabled by the power of data, additive manufacturing, open source developing, machine learning, AI, and self-healing networks. And all of these are being driven by use cases that have practical applications that deliver on social economic benefits. If we take a short dive into the graph, we can see how innovations help accelerate the pace of the evolution of traditional aviation. New aircraft are safer, more efficient, and even cheaper, I would say, through the use of a high degree of automation in the design, manufacturing, operation, and maintenance of aircraft. The innovations have also created new sectors in our transport industry. Unmanned aircraft, which deliver not just packages, but blood, medication, and help ensure enhanced responses to disasters, including wildfires, are not just on the horizon, they are already in our airspace. Urban air mobility, or advanced air mobility, represented by this cluster you see in blue, are where some aircraft are already in some sort of certification process. There's also a whole new sector up way above where traditional aviation flies, represented here in the stratospheric operations node. And they deliver what used to be delivered from satellite services. And sometimes these are called pseudo-satellites. One of the key enablers in all of this is AI. And here you see a few areas and organizations that are already developing solutions in AI that are in some stage of very high maturity in terms of their availability for use by the sector. AI solutions include self-service solutions, optimize employee workflow, and unlock the ability to become more predictive in safety, security, air traffic, just to name a few. So the skies are already benefiting from these innovations, and the amount of projects that are in the pipeline are quite impressive. The question then turns away from science and technology and towards the more important areas of legal, ethical, and policy issues. As I am an engineer, I must confess that one of my hopes has always been that the laws of humans are not more insurmountable than the laws of physics. But I've always been of the opinion that the former, the laws of humans, is a much more challenging area than the latter. And in this area, there are indeed challenges. Not only are they complex in nature, but there isn't much time perhaps to figure this out. And in some areas, we may already be a little bit behind. Questions such as, do passengers have the right to transparency and privacy over the data and algorithms that are used as a potential basis to deny flight or place them in special screening circumstances? Or with respect to AI, what about privacy, discrimination, and liability when things go wrong? To that end, I am extremely honored to introduce you to our two distinguished panelists who are at the leading edge of this exciting sector. Ken Quinn, a partner at the global law firm of Clyde and Co., which is based in London, but Ken is based in Washington, D.C. Ken is known to many of you and is a close friend of ICAO, where he was vice chair of our Safety Information Protection Task Force and works closely with us in his capacity as general counsel of the Flight Safety Foundation. He's also been a frequent speaker and lecturer at McGill Institute Air Space Law. He formerly served as global chair of two other large firms. He is on the board and a fellow of the Royal Aeronautical Society. He is a former FAA Chief Consul and Consul to the Secretary of Transport. He's a former president of the International Aviation Club and former chair of the ABA Forum on Air and Space Law, where he remains on their executive committee. Joining him on the panel is Kinga Kolasa-Sokolowska. Kinga is a client advisor at Marsh Broker Japan and a lecturer at Rikyo University's College of Law and Politics in Tokyo. Kinga comes from a varied background that includes legal, broking, and academic experience. She presented on aviation insurance and risk-related matters at a number of conferences, including the International Conference on the Global Impact of Artificial Intelligence Across Industries at Kingston University, London, and McGill Conference on International Aviation Liability and Insurance in Montreal, and the Air Law Conference organized by Worldwide Airport Lawyers Association in Athens. Please join me in welcoming them both to this session. Ken, if I may start with you, can you give us some insight into this topic?
Sure, Yuri, and I think leave that up there. I think that's a great beginning. First, I want to thank, obviously, the McGill University Institute of Air and Space Law, just a preeminent place for education, higher education, and doctoral analysis of these critical issues like AI, and also to ICAO and you, Yuri, for putting the panel together. You know, AI is not new. You know, I was representing SABRE back in the day in deregulating the global distribution system industry. And when they split off from American Airlines, they were already using yield management, systems and taking data and in real time, manipulating that data to make sure that they were maximizing revenues and handling passengers in the best way. We've now seen, though, three stages, I think, in commercial aviation. First is the jet era, and then we have fly-by-wire, and now we have artificial intelligence. And you mentioned capital and engineering. And what's interesting is a lot of my clients in this area have both of those things in a boatload. Our finest graduates from MIT and Stanford here in the States and Cranfield and UK and so many other places are applying themselves in AI in aviation. They're not going necessarily to the airlines where they I think either fairly or unfairly view them as using existing technology that is old and flying airplanes that are 20 years old. Instead, they want to create urban air mobility. They want to create the supersonic jet of the future. And the capital markets are responding favorably to their own time and investment. So when you see companies like Kitty Hawk or Joby or Archer or X-Wing, these are companies that, in addition to the big OEMs and some of the airlines that are investing in their technologies like JetBlue Technology Ventures, what Amy's been able to do there, it's quite exciting, and it is transformative technology, limited by other technology, namely battery technology in terms of its distance and weight and ability. But they're moving beyond yield management systems. They're moving beyond customer relations and getting into, what we would call in the Flight Safety Foundation, increasingly safety sensitive positions. And no one better than my client there, Dr. Hassan Shahidi, who developed the SIAS program with the FAA when he was at MITRE, to understand the importance of manipulating big data with sophisticated algorithms to aid decision making. But in many cases now, we are seeing, and we all know that like 76% or so of accidents are due to human error, that it's not just aiding decision making, it's capable of that decision making on its own, faster, better, smarter, maybe, than a human being. And so what do we do with that to incorporate it from a legal, ethical, and policy perspective? From a commercial arrangement, contractual perspective, you want to be thinking about your reps and warranties, your indemnities, making sure that the technology is, that they have adequate protection to the technology, and it's their technology. You want to make sure there's adequate IP protection. Can you patent it? Can you copyright it? Can you use it and as a trade secret information? It can even affect antitrust exposure. So you don't need to communicate to conspire or combine in the trade of trade if your algorithms are instantaneously matching pricing decisions of your competitors. And so how do we manage that risk, and how do we deal with the consumer angle that's saying, hey, we want to roll in this. We deserve to know what you're doing and how you're manipulating your data. That's my data. And if I'm prejudiced by the outcome of that data, i.e. what you mentioned, for example, and I'm an advisor to Securiport, if the result of that is that I'm a selectee and I'm denied a flight because you've harnessed data far more than the watch list all over the world and all over the data sources to make a decision that I am a person of interest, I'm a potential whatever, terrorist to a human trafficker to a drug trafficker, someone we want to keep out of our country, and therefore we're banning you from the country. Query whether you have a right to know what was in that black box, right? And so, Europe, I think, has done a wonderful job through GDPR, through IASL's major paper on our artificial intelligence to try to set forth some fundamental principles that we need to be transparent, explainable, fair, empirically sound, and foster accountability for these systems. But then it remains to be seen. So what happens when it goes wrong? We want it to go right. We want it to replace that human error that may have happened on Air France 447, where conflicting signals and bells and whistles and heart rate goes up. And you're in a stall, but you don't realize you're in a stall where a computer may have made those instantaneous decisions to easily get you out of that stall. But if it doesn't recognize that, it makes a wrong decision and creates, knock on wood, a crash with souls on board, then where's the liability? Is it, traditionally STIRK liability? Yes. The Montreal Convention and others, we're still going to hold the folks who are operating and who bought the system, whether it was developed by the OEM or incorporated as a vendor to the OEM. But there are more gnarly questions along the way to that ultimate problem of who's accountable in a negligence standpoint for injury and product liability. But I'm sure we'll get into that. And I see a lot of friends that are coming online here, and I look forward to answering their questions. But I hope that just gives folks a flavor for the complexity of harnessing this transformative AI technology into increasingly safety-sensitive decision-making, if not actual decisions. Because when things go wrong, people are going to want to know their rights and obligations, look to their contract, look to the courts, look to guidance material that's out there to really build confidence that normal systems of checks and balances and accountability and transparency will continue to exist. And we don't have the Stephen Hawkins AI is going to lead to the wiping out the human race, but rather it might be a quantum jump in safety. We've already seen that with this IS-based systems where we're harnessing that big data to really come up with predictive systems, so we don't have to learn from the smoking hole in the ground. We're going to be able to learn from these predictive systems because we've manipulated the data with sophisticated algorithms that come out with an outcome that recommends a mitigation that then prevents the loss of life in the future. So that's kind of my general overview on that, Yuri.
Thank you very much. Kinga, your opening thoughts, please.
Thank you very much, Yuri. Thank you very much, Ken, for your insightful comments. If I may, I would like to complement what Ken has just said. but I'm not going to talk about the law, so please forgive me. Instead, I will focus on the risks. So I will take slightly different perspective. We can already mentioned a bit on that. So aviation industry is in constant quest to conquer risks, and for the most part with the great success. But we don't have to look far to see that life has a way to humble us. And artificial intelligence has the potential to improve aviation industry's capabilities when it comes to the risk management, to build resilience and to build performance. Of course, it is not solution to all aviation industry problems, but when designed carefully and implemented with care, it can produce really meaningful results. So there is a lot of potential there. But as already Yuri and Ken proved, it is not only a matter of potential. Aviation already benefits from the use of AI. And just to add some more applications like network and fleet scheduling, or now quite important application used by IATA to identify new travel demand triggers, because at the moment it's not so obvious as it was in the past years, to detect also risks, new risks, and also to very interesting applications which have been developed recently, and we could see them on the on Yuri's presentation, but I would like to just mention that because I found them very just very important. So these applications are developed by Airbus, so ATC speech to text in real time, so assistance to pilot, and it uses natural language processing, and also mentioned vision-based autonomous taxiing, takeoff and landing, so using deep learning. So AI brings a lot of opportunities here, but it brings also a lot of new risks. And apart from the risk that it can outsmart us and take over control and potentially destroy humanity, I mean, I don't rule it out, but in the short term, we seem to not get close to the artificial general intelligence, at least not yet. But there are a few very legitimate concerns and challenges, mostly in the safety and security realm, such as misuse of AI systems, unreliability of the systems, vulnerability to attack. Huge challenge for sure is human AI integration. And from what I've heard from practical examples, this is equal challenge to the technical challenges. So convincing human users and users that the system is trustworthy, and the same applies also to public, it's a huge challenge. So it must start with a design, with training, so building AI skills, data literacy, users' trust, building users' confidence. So that these are huge challenges. For sure, a huge challenge is inherent lack of predictability. But it also, as on some occasions we discussed, it also applies to humans. So it's not nothing that new in aviation. And one of the biggest challenges, data. So quality, accurateness, completeness of data used, and then data governance, access rights, usage rights, data protection, security. These are huge challenges for the aviation community. Data sharing. There are already a few platforms for data sharing in aviation within IATA. There is Skywise by Airbus, and also platform developed by ASA. So this has been done before, but still it's ongoing process. So to summarize, there are many opportunities, but also many risks involved. And but what is most important, AI is already here. So it's not like discussion about the future, and pandemic accelerated this process. So whether we want it or not, and whether we just notice the process happening, it's just there. And many systems are already augmented with AI. Kevin Kelly, co-founder of Wired, said that now everything that we formerly electrified, now we will cognify. So it's like a new electricity. And to mitigate the adverse impact of technology and maximize benefits, we need to have this discussion. And we need to recognize that there is a lot of work to be done, and experts from many fields, not only from legal profession, but engineers and from risk management and psychology and social science and data science and so on. So from various areas are needed to have this discussion, because it goes beyond aviation industry, and it just needs to start now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to both of you for your initial remarks, and it's reassuring to know that there are already a lot of experts meeting in a lot of areas, ensuring, I'd say, for society, to the extent they can, that considerations are being taken and are leading to some some actionable things for those who design these systems to be able to incorporate. Now, if I could just follow up with one very simple sounding question, but I know it's not so simple. And if you just give us a little bit of thoughts on what you think the definition for AI is, especially within the context of the legal side. So Kinga, perhaps I could start with you.
Thank you, Yuri. This is a difficult question, because we do not have a definition. So like generally accepted definition of AI. For the purpose of various documents, it has been created. So when we look in a specific document, it's usually it's there for just for the purpose of the specific report. But I think AI in general is a kind of, at the moment, like catch-all term. So it encompasses many applications, but I really like the definition, and I believe that it really reflects what we have now, that it is a system that is very narrow in its intelligence. So it's trained to work with data sets in a very specific context, just with very specific problems. So we are not here discussing the human level intelligence yet or superseding human intelligence, but we are talking about very narrow applications. So where AI matches human abilities or is just exceeds what human can do.
Then I guess, Yuri, I would say that in my book, it's all encompassing, and I think he also said it well, but the AI is basically any technology that seeks to emulate the performance of the human brain. And you can get into whether it's a model-driven AI or data-driven AI, and then subsets of that where you get into machine learning, and then deeper driven with neural networks that are really trying to focus on how the brain would respond, but to try to use that data that comes in with its algorithms to then increase as the data comes in their performance of whatever it is that you're trying to do. In aviation, of course, we see this a lot in our preventative maintenance programs. So you're keeping data on an engine, and it's monitoring, and it's saving an enormous amount of time and money, and arguably increasing safety a lot, because we're no longer doing you got to do a C or D check and take the engine off at this time after so many hours, but we're able to real time figure out any issues that are associated with the engine or with the fuselage and corrosion and fatigue, to really monitor these systems. But more generally for the consumer, it's Alexa learning your voice. It's Alexa learning your habits. It's Alexa learning what you're interested in. It's our iPhones that I start typing a message to Kinga, and it starts telling me the words that I typically use or the acronyms that I might use of ICAO. All of these are examples of an AI application. Where they're getting more sophisticated now, though, is in taking over the functions of a human brain and saying, maybe we don't even need the human. And that's where people begin to get quite concerned. But I will tell you, having spent a lot of time with folks in Silicon Valley and other places, a lot of them think we just don't get it. That our systems are antiquated, that we don't have regulators who know AI at all. We don't have an institute of AI within FAA to look at all the examples. We don't really know how to certificate an air mobility system that's based entirely on AI, including even an entirely remote pilotless system. There are traditional approaches from an aircraft certification standpoint that just say, whoa, we were used to 10 to the -9 testing and flying and coming back, and over 10 years we'll let you know if we are going to certificate this for revenue flights and passengers. They don't want to wait. They don't think they have to wait. They think the technology is here, and they want to exploit it for the betterment of mankind and womankind, and yet they're running into aviation safety, which of course is understandably very conservative, and we're justifiably proud of where we are in our safety record and the improvements of our safety record. But there is a bit of a clash of culture that happens when looking at that formal definition that's all encompassing and getting into where the rubber meets the road on a particular application.
Thank you very much. And if I may add to what you just said, the experience that I have with quite a few of these, let's say, innovators who are very excited and can see a way to deliver something that's good for humanity, and then they see regulation almost as a hurdle, and we have to turn that mindset around, saying regulation is actually an enabler, because the regulator owns the solemn duty to protect the public interests, and that's not something that they can give to others. But when you have potentially very beneficial technology show up the door, but somehow is very difficult to understand for a regulator, who signs off on protecting the public interest, I think that puts us in a situation that we don't necessarily need to be, because this is not about people knowing things that other people cannot understand. This is more about making sure that the information always stays ahead of the decisions that need to be made. And I think many forums, especially the ones that we see here from McGill Law and other areas, they really try to keep that information ahead of when the decision makers need to make it. So maybe to touch on the data real quick. So who owns the data and how is it protected? If you could talk a little bit about that, please, Ken.
Okay, first let me just respond. I think that I know a lot of my friends out in California would not agree with the statement that the regulator is an enabler. They would say the regulator is an anchor around our necks that's preventing us from fundamental innovation, and they need to catch up. And it is an interesting iterative process between the regulator and the regulated to try to get this to happen. And they see traditional regulation on traditional applications like certification taking ever more time, and saying, wow, if you can't get to delegation of authority on a 787 Dreamliner with a company like Boeing with huge data and performance issues that are, they believe, solved, and they have to go through the ringer and it takes 2 years. What's going to happen to my system where I just want to go 4 hours out carrying cargo in unpopulated areas? So no biggie if it drops a package or even if it collapses. We want to learn from that. They speak of learnings, a word that I always thought was singular. They want learnings from failure. Facebook, which I've worked with on their high altitude drone project, they originally had a culture of, we break things and we learn from breaking things. Well, I came from the FAA. We don't like to break things, right? We don't like to learn from breaking things. And so meshing those is difficult, but I think achievable because of we learn from the data. And the who owns the data question is an important one. Generally speaking, if it's out there, you don't own it, right? You own data when you protect data. You protect data usually through invocation of some form of intellectual property. Now you have to, interestingly, be a human to have ownership of that data. There's a famous monkey selfie case where the monkey took a selfie and the court said, monkey's not a human. He can't own that selfie. It's got to be a person. So is an AI system a person? No. So who owns the data is the designer of the data who has taken appropriate steps to either patent it or copyright it, or I think more appropriately treat it as a trade secret and prohibit and prevent others from accessing that data and label it and make it anonymous, anonymize the underlying data. And if you do all of that and you go through those steps and you have contractual clauses that restrict the data and recognize that ownership, then you have it. But query, can the consumer access your own data? Early on in AI, we did have, I'd say, probably a consumer-friendly reaction in a lot of countries, including the United States. You'd have a Fair Credit Reporting Act. I want to see why I got turned down for my mortgage. So was it, oh, okay, I didn't pay the credit card on time. Oh yeah, I forgot about that debt. The collector was after me. So you had the black box that determined an outcome that turned you down for your mortgage, and you're able to some degree to come back and say, well, why? That's not going to occur in national security. I will quite confidently tell you that there's a boatload of data that's out there, and we're trying to catch criminals, and it's serious business. and we're gonna cast a very wide net in whatever data we can. And if that means somehow I can access your Twitter account, I can access your Facebook, I can access other accounts, your college alumni, where you said something that was derogatory and was a racial slur, I'm going to use that data. Maybe it's not to deny flight, maybe it's to deny employment, right? But your ability as a consumer to come back and say, well, why did you turn me down for a job? I think the employer can freely cast that data net to use it. But what's really of concern, though, is the underlying privacy of the data breaches, the hackers that are out there. When you have, voluminous data, we all know these data breaches occur and can cause a huge privacy issues, financial penalty issues. So you've got to protect that data once you make a decision you're going to collect it. And obviously, as you know from the Safety Information Protection Task Force, we work closely with ICAO, and member states need to be taking their standards and recommended practices into account to have national legislation that protects data and the misuse of data, particularly in the accident context. We harped on that for some time to say, we collect data to use it for aviation safety, not to criminalize someone's conduct or behavior. And so making sure that that doesn't wind up in the courts, because we want people to come forward freely and admit mistakes to provide data that's useful. Because if I can have everybody on this call tell me about all of your mistakes, I don't want to hear them. But if I did, I could probably find a common thread somewhere that, oh, I see that there's been people who drank too much during COVID, and maybe that's something we need to address. So there's these common factors that when all the data is cast can be very powerful means to help civilization, help human decision making. And it's something that we do need to enable, but regulators need to keep that in mind, because you don't want to stifle this unbelievably transformative, innovative aviation improvements.
Thank you very much. And so, Kinga, from a risk perspective on this same issue, are there some risks that you see societies taking with data and kind of sleepwalking into that they might not necessarily be aware? But in general, what are the risks associated as you imagine the vast amounts of data that are going to have to feed AI for it to unleash its potential?
So there are a lot of risk associated in general with data sharing, and both in terms of safety and security of AI applications. So as I mentioned, we need to have accurate, complete, and also enough quality of data to just get the outcome we are expecting. But also there are a lot of risk associated with the security of this data, and it is crucial to have this clear mechanisms to protect of data protection, of security, of data governance, just to make sure this all this data, the data that we are using, are properly managed and protected. So usually this when it comes to the data sharing, the data that are fed into the system are not then kind of used, that the raw data are not used to share. So they're like, they go through the process, and we receive like analytics, and so not raw data. So that's also important part to understand.
Thank you very much. And I think we have one question from the floor, and I'll just read it out. And if any of you want to chime in on it, is it fair to distinguish between AI and machine learning? As the person submitted question says, she understands that most preventative prescriptive maintenance systems are machine learning. And so that's the question. But I also want to maybe touch a little bit back on the regulator thing. Do you see regulators using AI for their regulatory functions to keep up perhaps with the evolution of what we're seeing from the industry? So is that something that you're seeing as, if somebody is using AI or machine learning in a preventative maintenance program, are they trying to regulate that the traditional way, or have they developed their own tools to understand or to test, let's say, and to certify to a certain extent, if we use that word? So open question, Ken, perhaps?
Yeah, I think regulators are making a very good faith attempt to embrace AI in their own practices and to permit use in commercial aviation, particularly from Boeing and Airbus. It used to be obviously Bombardier and GE and Pratt and Rolls-Royce. They do work very closely with them on approving their AI-related systems. Obviously, we have the difficulty of the MCAS system on the 737 MAX as a form of an AI system, and criticism over the way that was particularly certificated and what was presented to the FAA, or what was not presented to the FAA. So I see them embracing it in their own use, and of course, the big quantum leap in safety improvements has been through the FAA's own ICAO program that has so many sources of data coming in, including air traffic management and control, right? And everyone's been supportive to their credit with the unions, and I'd credit people like Peggy Gilligan and Ellie Barami and Mike Coelho and so many others as integrating that and protecting that. Unfortunately, we've got to be careful, though, that we don't have a worldwide safety system where the safest get safer and the less safe continue to fall behind because they don't incorporate AI. They're not manipulating the data that they have with appropriate algorithms, or they're not protecting the underlying data. And so IASA has embraced AI in a fabulous white paper that I would commend everyone to read. And they're coming up with their equivalent of ICAO, and some of the more sophisticated systems, the JCB, among others in Japan, are doing a great job because they're at the forefront of AI technology. But we still have to deal with then the consequences, and there's a bit of a divide in terms of consequences and liability between commercial aviation, where I think traditional precepts of strict liability and Montreal Convention, where we take care of, we compensate victims of crashes, whether it's AI related or not, right? And insurers, they have to maintain insurance, got to compensate people, and they do a good job now of making sure people are not disputing liability, but they're getting, can never compensate fully, but they're resolving these cases. To now application of AI in urban air mobility, or not commercial aircraft, not really signatories to anything, but maybe having the potential for mid-air collision, for doing damage to people, on the ground, Rome Convention, right, to people in the air, Montreal Convention, and query whether they've signed up to the whole liability system that works so well. The answer is no. And we've got to figure out ways to make sure that from the amateur to the sophisticated who's using AI in either it's urban air mobility or even having fun on the weekend, that they understand and accept the consequences. And of course, many of them are not going to be with the financial fortitude to accept the consequences. So what do we do about that?
Thank you. So, Kinga, if you could share some thoughts on that, but perhaps also touching on that liability. How is that? How can one limit the liability exposure when implementing AI? I think perhaps that's the risk models that you've been developing, or you and your colleagues have been developing. Thank you.
I believe that it is really important to take preventive measures. So once we take preventive measures, it limits also our liability exposure. So if we put the proper mechanism, the AI governance also within specific organizations, so within specific company, but also at the higher level, so regionally or internationally, it limits the potential of failure occurrence. So if we have enough Swiss cheese layers, it will limit the potential chance that something will go wrong, and it's all starts from the design. So it needs to start as early as design of AI tool, which is appropriate for aviation industry, and that end users needs to be taken into account. And then it goes through training and implementations of human AI integration, and building all this security and safety measures. So this is a huge topic, but having all this mechanism in place will certainly limit this exposure. Sure.
And Yuri, I think I would just add that there's traditional means, right? Not only in the compensation part of it, but in the drafting risk management. So to make sure your reps and warranties are thorough, and make sure you've got appropriate indemnification, that you have liability caps and limitations of liability, that you have adequate insurance. But then we have additional issues at Kinga's wonderful article, and thank you again for sending that, Kinga. There's huge privacy issues and discrimination issues, bias issues that are out there. If you're making an employment decision based on voice recognition, right? And that person has a muffled voice that maybe your AI system says that's not the kind of person we need. Maybe they have a speech impediment, and you've just discriminated against someone with a disability. If you have an iris system for security, or I'm trying to monitor your heartbeat as you're coming into the security pre-checks to see if you have elevated heart rate, to indicate that you could be a would-be terrorist with something on your mind because your heart races. Maybe the person has a fibrillation issue, and are we going to single these people out? And are they going to be able to get through and say, no, I'm not. I shouldn't be selected. I have this as an issue, but maybe they didn't even know that they were being subjected to an AI-based, very sophisticated, security system. So these are important questions that security tends to exempt from GDPR, but we still need to make sure that we're being responsible, we're being transparent to the extent we can, we're being accountable with procedures for someone to challenge, an outcome-based decision that might just be wrong, with the best of intentions, with the best of the algorithms.
Thank you. I think that's a very interesting insight, and I think it provides people an understanding of the way forward from a lot of these complicated questions. But there's one here about, where do you see the future of AI in aviation and progress in regulations within the next 10 years? So in the next 10 years, how do we see this unfolding? And if I may ask a question, perhaps from the perspective of international, what's going to be the most challenging thing to harmonize or to get the world, regulators to agree on when it comes to regulating AI? So Kinga, perhaps we can start with you.
I see many issues here, but I think the most pressing would be making sure that AI is safe. So the AI that is implemented, that is already there, and that is it's going to be implemented in the future is safe. I don't know the extent of difficulty when it comes to the harmonization of these rules, but I guess if we already have many systems that are being developed and are being implemented, they may potentially not comply with these new rules, which are not yet there. So I think the safety and also data, which we just keep repeating, are the most pressing and challenging aspects of.
So,
yes.
Thank you, and I think it does come back to that point. But Ken, do you see anything if there could be, a new kind of international instrument? Is that necessary here for us in AI, or it can evolve from the current foundations that we have?
I don't know if we need an international instrument on AI as yet, and you've got to be very careful about developing these instruments so as not to stifle innovation. And I think there's a risk too that in Europe, I would say they're far more protective of privacy and data, right, with the GDPR than the United States and other countries like New Zealand, for example, where I've sent some clients because of their open-mindedness for innovation. In the States, we're championing innovation perhaps to a greater degree over individual privacy. There's so many of us that know that our stuff is out there and it's probably going to be subject to a breach, and I've been notified of password leaks, and we're kind of ingrained with it. But I think your initial question of what's the ultimate question of harmonization and the biggest challenge, and I think the ultimate AI in aviation is unmanned remote pilotless aircraft flying passengers around, completely autonomous flight. And I have seen it happen already, and it's amazing. And so how we get regulators, how we get unions, we have labor unions and pilots and flight attendants that are used to manipulating those controls. And if you ask, as I did last night with some clients, what would you think of getting on a plane that is pilotless? And it's all remote controlled with AI. And there weren't many hands that went up. And if you ask the FAA, there's going to be even fewer hands to go up. And so the dream of fully autonomous flight with passengers is yet to be realized. And I think it's going to be a challenge in the next 10 years to look at the people who say we can do this now safely and even safer than what's happening with men and women at the controls. I mean, if you look at some studies recently that came out, I think Flight Safety Foundation just revealed, I mean, when you survey pilots, there was like 1/3 of them have sleep disorders and fatigue issues right now. Now, that's not a comforting thought. AI doesn't have a sleep disorder. They make decisions rapid and well. But are they exposed to breach? Not just to the data, but are they exposed to hacking? Could Russian hackers, for example, get at an approved, certificated pilotless flight, take over the controls, send it into a building? Those are profound questions of the underlying resiliency of the data, but of the controls. So we don't have an ultimate lost link with passengers on board. It's not just the world of the Jetsons. It's a world that's kind of coming soon to a theater near you. And are we prepared to not just watch it, but hop onto that aircraft? It'll be, I think, a fascinating journey.
Yeah, indeed, and I think if you solve for the most difficult use case, there'll be all of these benefits for everyone else along the way. And I think that does keep the focus on, even if you never get to the pilotless aircraft flying passengers across the oceans. As you try to get to there'll be a lot of proven benefits that will focus a regulator and the industry on what could be done with this.
But what about the jobs, right?
Yeah,
it's not limited to the pilots. Air traffic control. We still have places all over the world where you've got paper strips, where you have voice commands that can't be, readily understood because of the radio frequency or the use of the pilot or the individual controller. When all of that could be AI directed with the data instruction to descend and maintain, to flight level 310. It's those kinds of things could be a lot more accurate and therefore beneficial. At the same time, they're taking away jobs potentially.
And that's an interesting point. And I think if we plan this properly, it won't do that, or it will minimize that, because even at work, in our daily work, I'd say we do things that are called robotic processes. Constant, the same thing, and it's not that not doing that would make people lose a job. It frees them up to do the part of the job that's of higher value. And I think your examples that you've been giving, the both of you, risk management, I think when information travels ahead of passengers, you had a shift between the security or the safety expert being administratively looking and reading paper to having the information and focusing on risk, which is their primary task, right? So they didn't have to say, hey, can you give me the documents, read that and then only have 10% of the job, let's say, to focus on risk. But I think this is what you've both been very clearly demonstrating here, that this is the world that we are in and we should look forward to. But we have these issues around it. There's one question here that is a little bit specific. I am not a lawyer, so I don't know if, and it has to do with, so he's wondering whether underwriters have included an exclusionary clause involving AI in the airline insurance policy. So I'm not sure what I just read out, but if one of you could jump in and take that question.
I would have an answer, but it would be a billable answer.
Okay. Well, that's honest.
That's getting specific. Okay. But back on your point with focusing on an ability to do the higher value stuff, right? I think that's an important part of AI enabling, right? That we are able to take something that maybe people were focused on the routine. If you look at, for example, one of the more difficult things in human factors analysis that I discovered even in doing Lockerbie and doing passenger bag match, and then when I was representing all the security companies after 9/11, it's getting the human aptitude to stand in front of a screen for multiple people to be going by. And, if you look at my bag, I'm on travel and I'm off to London, I've got like a Radio Shack in my bag. I mean, there's cords, wires, battery packs. But if you had some AI that could identify a would-be bomb versus electrical components that are harmless, you take away that human aptitude and fatigue issue, become much more accurate on identifying risk factors there. And then you take Yuri, the behavioral person, who can identify a suspect and interrogate them and look at their Adam's apple and look at their eyes and really be more expert on identifying a person of interest, right? And be informed by the AI, but be focused on really getting that stack down and looking at some prominent needles and making a decision based on a behavioral analysis versus what was on the computer screen.
Thank you. And Kinga, if your thoughts on that, but there's also a question here about how do you think about managing unintended consequences of the AI system? So the question itself is, what are the risks of AI evolving its own epistemology and ethic? How do we think about managing unintended consequences?
That's a very good question, and certainly there will be many unintended consequences on the way, because to some degree these outcomes are unpredictable and we do not know what we don't know yet. So this certainly will need to be assessed, and it depends actually on the outcome. So these unintended consequences and assessing exactly what kind of consequences that were, because if it's the severity of these consequences. And I don't think it has been decided yet how we are going to deal with it. So it's still subject to the discussion, I believe.
Is there an example from your experience of an unintended consequence that comes into your mind that you thought that was a bit of a game changer kind of thing?
Yeah, I think all this, the issues which were already mentioned by Ken, so discrimination.
Oh, yes.
This is unintended consequence of the use of AI.
Yeah, I think
Sometimes surprising.
I think that when AI tool, uses an algorithm to make a prediction or decision that results in bias or disparate treatment, or if not outright discrimination, and it's in that black box where consumers aren't able to, or even regulators are able to tell the how and why it produced that unintended consequence and result. That is not accurate and extraordinarily unfair and violates privacy and maybe violates a lot of other things. Litigation can result, or you have a net safety security problem on your hands because it's made just the opposite, which is just a mistake. They've let the person of interest go through, or they've come up with a predictive maintenance schedule that didn't figure on the fatigue and corrosion because it was in a hot and humid environment, flying over Hawaii and the Pacific Islands, and it didn't take that factor into account. There was an example in the case law actually, where I think someone was they were in a school bus, and they were driving on the highway, and they went through an underpass that sheared the top of the school bus and caused injury to passengers. And the plaintiffs sued the GPS company and said, you were giving directions and the best way to get there, but you should have known that if you were a school bus, there was a height limitation with the underpass that could have caused damage. And therefore, it was negligence for you to have not put that into your predictive algorithm. I think that's an example of an unintended consequence that the courts will recognize as natural negligence. You built a system that was faulty, that didn't take in a data point that was critical. You got them there you got them there in the most efficient route that caused injury. Interesting.
Yeah, that's an interesting beyond the horizon issue, I guess. Well, it's no longer beyond if it's already been
No, not with
discussed.
cars. I mean, you've got the self-driving cars that causing accidents. It's here.
So just one last question here. We know what AI is already doing, or whatever we want to call it, automation, machine learning. And we know where we want to be, or where we're planning to be 10 years or ultimately. What's going to happen in the next year, do you think, with AI in aviation, or next years? That's because we're coming out of the pandemic now. But what are we going to see happening, and should we be worried about it? So, Kinga, if I can start with you, and then.
Predicting future, especially these days, is extremely difficult task. But I believe a lot of changes and a lot of new AI applications will be driven by pandemic, and we've already seen it. So before COVID-19, the use of AI was mostly focused on like customer service and managing capacity issues. And these days, it is increasingly used to limit like human-to-human interaction. And so, for example, touchless kiosks and virtual queuing, and also I see some applications regarding the health monitoring. So again, collecting additional data. So it's, I think to some degree it will go in that direction, but also development of autonomous, more autonomous flights, also single pilot that can potentially, where AI can be of assistance. Yeah, so in these two directions, and also improving fuel efficiency, so climate change. So just resolving various very challenging issues for the aviation industry. So supporting industry in these challenges.
Indeed, lots of potential. I think a lot of investments in there. Just as a side note, maybe a lighter note. Yeah, I think one day we'll use AI not to lose baggage anymore. It'd be even great if I could just scan my bag and the bag comes to me instead of me trying to get to the carousel with the bag. But I think, yeah, there are a lot of interesting applications there. So Ken, next couple of years, what's going to make the news?
No, I think Kinga hit on the head. Obviously, there's a lot of effort being made to ensure that our passport and related travel documentation includes our health status and certification, and to be able to monitor health on a real-time basis, and to see where threats come at the borders is a particularly important aspect. And I know IATA's travel passes is starting to make some good ground there. I think the beyond visual line of sight, that's the goal that's been so elusive for so many of these drone operations. I think we're starting to see the FAA and others begin authorizing increasing confidence of the data that's being provided to them, that they can deal with lost link, and that they can do small package delivery in a successful way, is going to be a real innovator. Whether they can get there, I think obviously there's going to be enormous time and attention spent on certification of the urban air mobility to allow packages in some cases, but ultimately people. I don't think it's going to be there in 2 years, but I know there's going to be a lot of effort, and it's underway right now with a lot of good people and a lot of money that's in this area. So the regulators of the world are going to be challenged, as are the infrastructure folks, to build the vertiports that are going to be necessary to accommodate these flights. And so there's some esteemed people I know that are on the boards and working for these companies, and ex-regulators, ex-administrators who are providing them with a lot of wisdom and advice. And I think it's going to come together, but it's going to take a lot of work. It's a huge challenge. And I think the industry's up for it, but we've got to be open-minded.
Yes, indeed. Meanwhile, on Mars, go Ingenuity. So,
Exactly.
well,
Well,
thank you very much. And if just give a few minutes, a few last thoughts. Especially, I think people want to know, how does this conversation continue, and how does one keep this on one's radar scope? So, Ken, if just a few closing remarks, followed by Kinga, please.
First of all, thanks again, Yuri, for moderating this, and for people online. It's great to see that you're online and engaged in this effort. And I encourage you to get more involved in AI applications. I think it's a lucrative area, and it's an important area. And it's wonderful to be on a panel with my dear friend Kinga. And again, their thoughts and prayers go out, as we started, to the folks in the Ukraine and Poland who are dealing with far more important and challenging days and weeks and months ahead. I would just say that it's AI is a really exciting technology that needs to be embraced and yet very carefully channeled to ensure that we don't result in unintended consequences, privacy violations, discrimination, bias, data leaks. These risks need to be taken care of, not just as a legal matter in your contracts and in your insurance and in their accident prevention, but also in how you build the algorithm and test the algorithm to make sure that it fundamentally is fair and transparent and can have accountability. But kudos to McGill Institute of Air and Space Law for sponsoring this webinar. I actually think that agencies like IASL and FAA should have their own institute of AI. If I were talking to Billy, as I probably will, Billy Nolan is the new Ali Barami and ABS-1, I'd say set up within your system a state-of-the-art AI institute and recruit some of the best minds, if you can, to then work with these private developers to ensure that their application of AI is rigorous and as safe as our commercial aviation system is safe. I think only by matching expertise with expertise from the regulator to the regulated are we going to be able to really take quantum steps forward in enabling AI in aviation. And thank you again, Yuri.
Thank you very much. Kinga, a few closing thoughts.
Thank you very much. Also, again, to the Institute for this opportunity. I would like to, maybe instead of summarizing also my thoughts, I would like to say what I have not said yet. So I really hope that AI will not be used to completely eliminate humans from aviation industry, and that it will be rather used to empower people, that to support decision making, to enhance human capabilities. And I really like the quote saying that the only human error that has been completely eliminated by automation is that of elevator operator. So I think that we still really need human users in our industry, and that contribution also of human intelligence to the safety of aviation is it's just over the years we've seen that we focus a lot on human error, but this contribution to safety has been great. And So I would like to summarize, maybe more optimistic, that still we underestimate human intelligence, and this in Japan, it is I've seen in some journal papers discussion about human robotic symbiosis. So let's just try to build this human AI symbiosis also in aviation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And interesting statement about elevators. And contrary to popular belief, stairs are not out of business. So thank you to all panelists, and of course to the McGill organizers, Maria and Kiran, and especially to Professor Jakhu. So with that, Professor, I'll hand the controls back to you.
Thank you very much, Yuri. You have done a fabulous job. Just a few comments, just to sort of wrap up on that. I must say that it is really eye-opening for me to learn about artificial intelligence. And I can say that I have not fully understood everything, but I certainly am more informed about artificial intelligence than I was before the start of the webinar. I learned a lot about it. But particularly, I think perhaps the most important thing which I heard, I think that may be true about our participant, is really what is artificial intelligence. I think in a way, and Kinga is right, that it depends on the definition about the context for which definition is created. But if I can say, for a commoner like me, I think what Ken said, it is really trying to see the decision making is to be made with artificial intelligence. So in a way, and I feel assured that artificial intelligence, at least for the time being, is not going to be replacing humans. So I see artificial intelligence as a tool for human decision making in that way. So we have not, so I don't have to worry about what Stephen Hawking said it. That's a different matter. And I really appreciate Yuri, your comment also, which is again is saying that the artificial intelligence is a technology which needs to be planned and managed in such a way it doesn't replace humans, particularly employment. I think that is a very, very important. So we have heard, and I heard with their enormous number of challenges, particularly from regulatory perspective, and both are excellent speakers have alluded to that, but I also see opportunities, particularly with respect to safety and security, which I think the raison d'etre of ICAO and aviation. If aviation is not safe or secure, people will not fly. So in a way, it is the raison d'etre of the aviation industry to make sure the use of artificial intelligence is actually enhancing safety and security. There's no shortage of challenges, and I think both of them have noted that. And again, I'm sure the humans will be managed to artificial intelligence with human intelligence and with artificial intelligence. So I'm very optimistic on that. But going forward, and by the way, I learned a lot from you, Ken, that Europe and especially IASL is going forward with some basic principle. I think that's a very good start. And I agree with you that perhaps there is no really need to look at any separate or specific international instrument, at least today. So what we need to see is artificial intelligence to be factored in the current regulatory regime as such. And that brings to the point, at the end, humans or human institutions are responsible and could be held liable in case there are problems with artificial intelligence. So the responsibility and liability still remains with the humans and within the current regulatory regime. Going forward, I personally very much appreciate, and I agree with the Kinga's assessment that first thing is the important thing is to understand. And I think this webinar at least helps me understanding what artificial intelligence is, and also there's a lot of work to be done. And for that it is indispensable that we should have an interdisciplinary approach to understand this development of technology, how things are done, what can be done, what cannot be done, and who is doing that kind of work. And this is the struggle humanity has always faced and will be facing in the future. Who wants to go faster, the other one to remain slow. We have seen, and you have alluded to the point, and other speakers have mentioned how artificial intelligence has already entered into aviation to the level of use of artificial intelligence or the role of artificial intelligence in aviation even today. And that is going to be increasing significantly. So I can understand the technical people are really considering the regulators to be hurdles. I heard that for all other fields, and that is true to a good extent. But at the same time, humans are there because of their safety and security. So that generally law is pretty slow. So one has to bridge this gap with fastness of the technology and slowness of regulation. Some balance need to be worked there. But keeping in mind that technology is for humans. Humans are not for technology. At the end, technology, particularly artificial intelligence we are talking about, it really should be at the service of humanity in a way that it enhances humanity's welfare. I will say that also that it makes, it should be used, or I hope it is used to make humans more humane. I think that is more important. So humans should not become machines in that way, that becomes robots with all kind of stuff. With that note, and I echo what said Kinga, and again, our thoughts and prayers are with people in Ukraine. And again, I want to thank you very much for moderator and panelists. And I know Ken and Kinga, I know, and Yuri, how busy you are. And I said it before the start of the seminar, let me repeat it. I love people who are busy because they have something to say. They are intelligent people. They are knowledgeable people. Again, thank you. On my own behalf and on behalf of the Institute, we are thankful to your time and an effort. And for our participants, please let us know if you have questions and suggestions about this webinar. As Yuri mentioned, this is recorded. It will be made available on the website of the Institute, but also on YouTube. Thank you. Stay safe, and our thoughts and prayers are again with the people in Ukraine. Merci beaucoup.